Welcome, everybody. I'm Candace Shively, a water conservation coordinator with the Division of Water Resources. As we get started, please continue to use the chat feature to share where you're joining from. We always love to see how many corners of the state we're reaching. If you happen to have a rain gauge in your yard, feel free to throw that number in the chat as well. As we go through these presentations, you can ask questions at any time. If you would please use the Q&A box versus the chat box, it just helps keep things organized and just ensures that we don't miss anything. We will hold the Q&A session at the end, but again, don't hesitate to ask questions as we go. Just some quick background as to why we're doing these monthly events. The goal is to support folks that are planning, establishing, and maintaining water-wise or water-efficient landscapes. The intent is to complement the landscape incentive program, which offers up to $3 per square foot for lawn that's replaced with water-efficient landscaping. The dollar amount and eligibility does vary based on where you live. So hopefully these tools on the screen will lead you in the right direction and help you determine eligibility and program guidelines for your area. If you are planning to participate in the program, please do not kill your lawn or remove your lawn until your project has been approved. We do need to verify that we have living lawn within the project area. And then after this event's over, there will be a survey that auto-generates. If there are topics that you'd like us to consider, please don't hesitate to throw those into that survey. We always love getting that feedback. Today, we are going to talk about weeds. We have Katie Wagner with USU Extension joining us. Managing weeds in the waterwise landscape can be tricky, so this was a topic that was very much asked for in the survey results. But before we get started, or before we get to the presentation, I'm going to turn the time over to Wes and Ryan to cover our maintenance minutes for the month. Wes is with USU Extension. He's our landscape expert that will cover what's happening in the more moderate parts of the state, temperature-wise. And then Ryan is with the Washington County Water Conservancy District, and he manages the beautiful Red Hills Desert Garden, and he'll cover what's going on in the warmer parts of the state. So, Wes, I will go ahead and turn the time over to you.
Okay, are you seeing that slide?
Yeah, it looks great.
Okay, well, I guess my mind's been on food production recently. So some of the maintenance minute uh little notices here that I thought of have to do with that. But I it's always ironic to me for me sometimes how much effort I put into my vegetable garden and fruit gardening only to have the fruits of that go to waste. So if you're like me and sometimes you get burned out or you don't know where to start with preserving some of the food that you've grown over this season, Preserve the Harvest, which is a USU extension program, has a number of great resources, live stream classes, and a lot of fact sheets that can help you to yeah, just keep what you've grown and don't let it go to waste. So another one, and a couple of these were touched on by Roe last week, but cool season crops. We're headed now. It's been an awesome little reprieve from the heat wave that we've had this summer. This little cool dip we've seen. So a lot of crops, cool season crops, a lot of your leafy greens. Those can be seeded, transplanted now, so that you can have a harvest throughout the fall and into the winter, especially if you're applying some sort of cover on those. So things like spinach, mustard greens, bok choy, some different lettuces, carrots, radish, kale. Kale if you're going to be providing some sort of cover, because that's a little longer to get going and produce. But that can be something if you're interested in having those for a longer production season. You can get those started right now. And then I know we're talking about weeds, or they're talking about weeds today. And so, one element is to not let those go to seeds. But for those plants that you're interested in letting go to seed, now's a perfect time to save some of those seeds. So a couple notes on that. Look at the seed packets that you have or from the source that you purchase those, whether those are open pollinated versus hybrid versus heirloom, right? So hybrid means that for a number of genetic reasons, which we won't get into today, If you save seed from those, which you totally can, they're going to come back different next year, right? Than the parent that you collected from. If it's demarcated as open pollinated or as an heirloom, then you're most likely going to get seed or seed that will come back true to type or it's resembling the parent. Now, another thing to consider whether that's outcrossing versus inbreeding. And again, if you're interested in this, shoot me a text or an email. I'll talk more. But things like vining crops that have separate female and male flowers, those are often difficult to save seed from unless you do a little legwork initially and do some prep work. But for a lot of your flowering crops, especially ornamentals, native wild flowers, those can be saved very easily, and you can save a few bucks next spring, and you can grow something that's going to become more and more adapted to your climate as you keep saving those. And then lastly, just a plug with these cool temperatures, today I've seen a number of sprinkler systems going off while it's been raining. And so just keep that in mind, especially as the temperature's cool, as we get more precipitation. This is a plug for the smart controller rebate program. Yeah, just keep an eye on that. So we're only using the water that we need. So that's all I have here. I'll stop sharing.
Awesome. Thanks, Wes. All right. Ryan.
All right, so down here in Washington County in the southern parts of the state, it is still summer, but we're now getting into that transition phase. September historically has been a good cool off month, but in recent years, we've seen summer temperatures well above 100, sometimes going into mid-September. So you really want to watch the temperatures before before you make any other real changes to your maintenance regime. But assuming we do get those cooler temperatures, right now it's looking positive that maybe we're done with our triple digits for the time being. So it's really a good time to evaluate your plants. How have they handled the summer? A lot of the some of the staples we've used historically, especially evergreen shrubs and hedges. Um, a lot of those have not done as well in recent years as the summer goes longer. The monsoons don't always show up in July and August like we're used to. Um, Assess things like your Indian hawthorns, photinias, euonymus, and if you're seeing leaf scorch or burning on the edges, it might be time to consider another species, and this is a great time to do it. Um, Once our daytime temperatures appear to be, consistently below 100, it's a great time for replanting, to planting new things or replacing things that have died. Um, and so, and as you plant here in the fall, it gives you all winter for the roots to get established. With one caveat, we've been doing a lot of kind of marginally hardy plants. We've been pushing a lot of zone 9 type plants in this area. I would hold off on those until spring. So if you're thinking of doing a Palo Verde or a marginally hardy cactus, hold off on planting those until the spring because the winter can be a little bit tough on them when they're freshly planted. Um, as far as fertilizing, if you've got lawn, wait until late September, early October to do your final lawn fertilization. And if you need to do any fertilization on other plants, usually you don't need to worry about it in the fall. If you're going to do it, just avoid the high nitrogen fertilizers. You don't want to put a whole lot of new, fresh growth right before the frost comes. Um, and then echoing what Wes said, adjust your irrigation timers. Where the days are getting shorter, the nights are cooler, and hopefully, daytime temperatures are also cooler. Um, fall tends to be when most water waste occurs. People get the message in the spring, they wait to water, but by fall they just forget about it and they keep that summer irrigation routine going until they shut it off maybe in November. And we don't need as much now. So adjust your timer or get a smart timer. That's what I prefer. Just even in my own house, I use a smart timer because I'm busy. I don't always I'm not fine tuning my schedule every week. If you have any pruning that needs to be done, you could do some light pruning now, pruning out deadwood or for shaping plants if necessary. And then one of the big problems we've been dealing with here lately is the snout weevil. Um, if you've had snout weevil in your agaves or yuccas, I recommend a minimum treatment in the spring. And then if you're still having problems or seeing damage, now's the time to do the second treatment. And that's usually with a systemic pesticide. Um, with the agaves, you don't really have much concern about passing on to pollinators unless they're blooming, which they rarely do. And yuccas, usually they're not blooming in the fall, so there's not a whole lot of the risk of impacting non-target species and pollinators is very minimal. So again, now's a good time to do that second round of treatments if you're seeing damage from those snout weevils. So that's all I've got.
Awesome. That was really helpful. Thank you both for your time and expertise. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So today, Katie and I are going to dive into weed control, which is one of the biggest challenges you'll face when transitioning from a traditional lawn-heavy landscape to a water-wise landscape. When you remove the lawn, you're not just taking out grass, you're removing the competition. Lawn acts like a living mulch. It covers the soil, it's going to outcompete many of the weeds, and once it's gone, weeds are going to seize that opportunity. So it's going to take some time for your new plants in the landscape to fill in and take over the role that grass was playing. So just be patient with your new projects. Some of the seeds can remain dormant and viable in the soil for decades, and a single square foot of soil can hold thousands of dormant seeds that are just waiting for the right conditions to sprout. Anytime you disturb the soil, you're bringing those hidden weed seeds to the surface. And then if you add water to that combo, you're going to have weeds. So if you're able, minimize unnecessary soil disturbance as much as possible during that installation process. And then always use drip irrigation. It's going to apply water directly to the area you need it versus more of a broad coverage rain-like approach that you get with a sprinkler. So the only way that the areas without irrigation get water is when it rains. And we haven't had a whole lot of rain this year. And personally, I haven't had to deal with too many weeds for most of the summer outside of my irrigated areas. Thankfully, we've gotten some rain over the last few days, so I am definitely anticipating some unwanted plants germinating here shortly. There are a lot of options for managing weeds in the landscape. We're going to talk about both chemical options as well as non-chemical options. And the option or options that you choose is totally up to you. It's a personal choice. It's dependent on your values, your time, and your comfort level. Our goal today is to help you determine a strategy that works best for you and keeps you one step ahead of the problem. So let's dive right into those strategies that Katie has lined up for us.
Okay, thank you, Candace, and good to see everybody. Thanks for having me. It's really important to formulate both short-term and long-term weed management plans, especially when you're thinking about installing or retrofitting a water-wise landscape. And so a lot of times we argue over the details, like what kind of a plant palette would we like to have? What are some of the features that we'd like to have in our landscape? But it's really important to take that next step forward to say, once we have those things in place, what kind of management is expected? And frankly, sometimes your design is going to be impacted by how much time, energy, money you have putting towards maintenance of that new landscape. So here we have, Batman and Robin, and they're fighting over their plant palette here. Robin wants the greenest lawn in the neighborhood. But Batman's like, no, stop that, Robin, plant native and start gardening for wildlife. But the villain is really going to take over in this whole episode are the weeds, because they're going to take advantage of the lack of their foresight in forming a management plan. This is kind of my opinion, but I think that short-term management or control are things like mechanical control, pulling and tilling, and chemical spraying. And so these are some of the more reactive things that we sometimes do in terms of weed control, and that we see a weed problem, we say, gosh, what are we going to do? I need to go dig those weeds out. I need to go pull them, or I need to go spray them. But you also want to be considering long-term control management tactics as well, things like exclusion and competition. And sometimes these are things that you can build over time that are really going to help you down the road to be spending less time, less money, less energy trying to maintain those landscapes. All right, so why are weeds? Why are weeds called weeds? Well, weeds are called weeds because they can be very aggressively spreading plants that tend to take over areas. I love this little cartoon. This is, of course, a COVID cartoon. It's also kind of true in terms of what we think of in terms of weed management or weed growth in the springtime some years. That, when we start out in the spring, everybody's really excited to garden for the year, and the weeds are all really small and everything looks very manageable. But you turn your back and you wait 3 or 4 weeks and you don't really do anything to help to control some of those populations. And we end up with an apocalyptic 4-headed green dragon lion, six-legged Zoom beast type of a problem that sometimes can feel really overwhelming. So do realize the reason why we identify certain plants as weeds is because they really are very well adapted to take over and spread very quickly in areas. They can reproduce quickly sometimes, especially in terms of annual weeds, and very abundantly. And sometimes they have adaptations, physiological adaptations that help them against being controlled. These adaptations may not have derived from human beings necessarily. It may be things like grazing and some of those types of pressures. But it's things like brittleness. And so, especially for some of our perennial weeds, they have natural junctions or natural placements where they're particularly brittle that make it so that they can sacrifice the above ground portions of the plant, but still be able to survive over the long term. So if you think about like a dandelion, tends to be the most brittle right at the base of the rosette. Even if that above ground portion snaps off, there may be for a mature plant 4 or 5 inches of taproot that can easily grow another plant. Or we think, of course, with field bindweed as well. Field bindweed has underground rhizomes. Rhizomes are underground stems. Stems have nodes, which are growing points. And so field bindweed purposefully makes a brittle kind of a physiological structure right at those nodes so that if the above ground portion of that plant is snapped off, then it can easily grow another plant in its place. Also things like herbicide resistance, and then again, some of these robust underground structures, not just that they're there, but they're really there in very large quantities. Bindweed, for example, can push down rhizomes somewhere in the depth range of about 10 feet under the soil surface level. So there can really be quite a bit that you can't see growing above ground that is there to help that wheat to sustain itself and reproduce well into the future. Okay. All right. So weeds are called weeds because they can establish rapidly in cases of disturbance, and Candace already kind of hit on that. Events like bare soil, construction, digging and tilling, overgrazing, mowing too low can be some practices that can help to bring about pressures. This is a picture actually currently of my backyard. We're clearly doing a construction project back there. And I just want to show you that this area you're looking at has been this way for about 3 years now. I don't know if you can see in the very back fence line, but that is how far we dug down, okay, to expose this level space here. It has been heavily compacted. It has not been watered in 3 years. I haven't put down any sort of organic matter or anything like that. And you can see a little bit of the green area that's growing back here. And what this is this is bindweed. So it just really goes to show you how tough some of these plants are. And certainly disturbances can make it so that they try to come in and take over areas very quickly. Overgrazing is not something that we really see a lot in urban areas, but some weed pressures, rubber rabbit brush is one I think about that people complain sometimes can be in abundance. It's of course a native plant for us. But typically we only see problems with its aggressive growth if there's overgrazing. But one of those maintenance practices that we can kind of mimic with the overgrazing in more urban areas is things like mowing too low. Weeds can grow in really tough conditions, things like severe drought, nutrient depleted soils, and under heavy compaction conditions. And just because we control them in an area doesn't mean that they're not going to reemerge into our areas at a later date in time. They can move via various transport ways like wind, water, bringing in topsoil, sometimes compost or animal manures that are brought into areas. Candace talked about the dormant weed seed bank. They can be brought in on animals, shoes, neighbors. If you have an area that you're trying to maintain and you have an adjacent area or a property that is not being maintained, you can expect to experience chronic weed pressure because there's constantly going to be new weed seeds blowing in from that area. And so that's a consideration as well. Okay, so it's really important when we think about weed management that we have a basic understanding of life cycle because it impacts so much in terms of how we prioritize our time for an effort for maximum efficiency. So one type of weed that we have is called an annual weed. It has a 1-year life cycle, so the parent plant does not overwinter. It completes its life cycle in a single growing season. There are a couple different types of annuals. One type is a summer annual, and this is an example here, which is crabgrass. And summer annuals, they tend to germinate in the spring and then grow actively in the summer, and then they mature their seed towards the end of the summer into the fall. They rely on that seed to be able to reproduce the following season. Another type of an annual is called a winter annual, and winter annuals tend to germinate in the fall. They kind of hang out throughout the winter. Typically in kind of a rosette or a basal, kind of a leaf pattern. And then they start growing actively early spring. They flower, they produce seed as quickly as they can. And then by the time the hot summer weather hits, they have produced mature seed and they kind of bug out at that point in time. So this is an example of a winter annual here, which is shepherd's purse. So some pro tips for managing annual weeds. Because they don't survive past one growing season, you want to make sure that you control them, that you're doing something to control them prior to flowering and seed formation. Minimizing disturbance of the weed seed bank, trying to do exclusion techniques, things like sun and water from the germination zones. This may be mulching over them. Candace mentioned the use of drip irrigation, so just watering plants that you want to grow in the landscape and not watering bare soil or other areas of the landscape because weeds like water too. Introducing competition for resources. This competition could be things like mulch, but could also be things like green mulch. And so these are, for example, plants like ground cover plants that you're planting to keep the soil covered. This could be turf, but this could be other types of plants as well. Or also things like trees. Heavy canopy trees can provide a lot of shade to underground soil growing areas that can be a competition for weeds that are trying to grow as well. And sometimes with annual weeds as well, we use pre-emergent herbicide. And this is a picture here that our friends at Jordan Valley Conservation Garden Park kind of loaned us. It's a great picture where it shows that pre-emergent, it's a layer. It's a barrier layer, and this needs to be put down prior to weed seed germination. So you can see those weed seeds below that barrier, kind of looks like those little rice grains there. And the idea here is as these weed seeds germinate and they start trying to push up growth through this layer, they're not able to continue that growth. And so this has to go down before germination. It won't have any impact on already germinated seedlings, but it can be a really effective control measure. Particularly against annual weed seeds if it's used properly. So Candace, I guess I'm curious to ask you that. I'm curious if you have had issues with any annual weeds in your landscapes you've been watching this year.
Yeah, definitely. I think we all do. I definitely have a lot of problems with kochia in one portion of my landscape in particular, which I'll show a photo of in just a second. Kochia is an annual weed. It's going to reproduce from seed, and it typically produces around like 14,000 seeds per plant. It's insane. And these seeds are dispersed in the fall when the plant detaches from its root system and becomes a tumbleweed. And so what happens in my setting is there are some fields just to the south of me. And every fall, the tumbleweeds roll down the street and they drop like all 14,000 seeds just along this front portion of my landscape. I've tried a lot of different things. I've tried vinegar, I've tried pulling them by hand, and over the years, I've just decided that my preferred method of treatment for this particular space is to use an herbicide. I don't use too many herbicides in the landscape, but there are a few areas that I do, and this is one of those. I personally, I like a product that has both a post-emergent and a pre-emergent mixed together. A post-emergent means it's something that you spray on the plant when the plant is visible and actively growing. So you're physically spraying it on the plant. And then the pre-emergent is what Katie just talked about. You're putting that down and it's targeting the seed as it's germinating before you actually see the plant. So there are products available like the one that's pictured that have both the pre and the post-emergent mixed together. Um, I could just use a pre-emergent in this area, but I've noticed that the problem varies a bit each year just based on spring rains and my personal preference is just to wait until I start to see some of the plants growing before I spray. I also have some problems with sunflower. And I'm going to use air quotes to call this one a weed because this is a me problem. I could easily cut this plant down. Katie mentioned just controlling the seeds before they become a problem. So I could cut this back before it sets seeds and my problem would basically go away. But in this setting, there's some sentimental value. My now fourth grader brought home a sunflower when he was in kindergarten, and we planted it in the garden. And I never cut it down that fall. And then the next spring, I had about 1,001 sunflower seeds sprout, and it got him interested in plants. So here we are. So every year we pick one or two that sprout on their own, and then we pull the rest. And for this portion of my landscape, my preferred method of control is just mechanical. I just use a hula hoe. I have a nice thick mulch layer between my garden beds, so using this tool is an option. Whereas in my previous example, it's not an option. Using a hula hoe and rock is it's just not feasible. I could use a pre-emergent in this space, but this tool is just, it's so fast and I'm not bothered enough to use a chemical in this area. If I had bindweed problems in this area, like Katie mentioned in an example, I probably have some different feelings. Katie, what other tips do you have for managing annual weeds?
Yeah, so kind of moving into some other options, control options that some people use. You might want to think about if you have an area that has really aggressive weed pressure and you really want to sort of get on top of it and you have some time, considering some site preparation techniques. A couple of them that are used. One is called soil solarization, and that's what this picture is here. And this is putting down, usually it's clear plastic mulch. I hear a lot of times, why wouldn't you put down black plastic mulch? Clear plastic actually superheats the topsoil inches a little bit better than black plastic does. And so it's kind of a greenhouse effect. So it's typically preferred. This is going down during the hottest summer months. You need at least about 4 to 6 weeks of this being down, again, during the hottest months, hottest days of the year. And usually what you do with this is you sort of level the area, you try to get it as level as you possibly can. You moisten the soil about 12 inches down, and you put down this clear plastic and you just let it sit there. And it will superheat the soil down to about 8 inches, actually, although you're going to get the best or the highest temperatures about 2 to 4 inches below the soil surface. But this is a way if you're trying to quote unquote cook the annual weed seeds at the close to the surface layer where you're going to have the greatest amount of germination. This is a way that you can reduce their viability, or you can eliminate their viability. You're just not going to necessarily take care of underground growing structures that are deeper than that range. And so certainly things like field bindweed and rhizomes and things like that aren't necessarily going to be completely eliminated by this technique, although it may help. Stale seedbed is another preparation technique some growers use. This is basically where you start managing an area that you treat it like you would almost like a vegetable garden. You water it, you fertilize it, you take really good care of it. You're wanting those weeds to grow, And as they do grow, then you're pulling them, you're removing them, you're eliminating them. And so you're basically encouraging them to grow before you put in a planting of plants that you want following. And then, of course, we already talked about heavy mulching as well. It's really important when you think about soil solarization and stale seedbed technique. You don't want to come along and re-agitate that weed seed bank after you do these techniques. Otherwise, you basically have not really completed your mission, your task at hand. Those dormant weed seeds will start growing for you. So that's an important consideration there as well. Utilizing frequent mowing to remove flower stalks, flowering parts. I know we had a question that came up that was about field bindweed, also in grass areas. I'm going to give you maybe some herbicide techniques for those as well, but never letting those types of things flower. And so if you are seeing those things growing, trying to mow them down or weed whack them down so that you're removing their potential of producing those seeds. Being mindful not to reintroduce weed seeds to landscape through things that you're bringing in, things like topsoil, compost, some sources of secondary irrigation water, if they don't have a good filter on them, can bring in a lot of weed seeds as well. Monitoring for weed germination in the spring. So we're thinking winter annuals are going to germinate sooner in the spring. Sometimes as gardeners, we get really excited and we think we've eliminated our annual weed seed pressure by our early spring weeding. Well, guess what? We have our summer annual weed seeds that are going to start germinating a little bit later. So kind of getting an idea of the timing of when those tend to be popping up. And it's really best if you can target those when they're just tiny little seedlings. They're much easier to control. So being vigilant and monitor and make sure that you're keeping up with weeding throughout the growing season is really important. And doing what you can to cooperate with your neighbors or adjacent properties as well. If there's, again, a huge weed seed pressure right next to you, then that's going to be kind of a constant nuisance for you. And so if you can work together and maybe formulate a plan, that can be really helpful in some of those types of situations. Okay, biennials are very similar to annuals. It's just that their growth is stretched out between 2 years instead of one. We manage them a lot the same way. So usually the first year they're pushing out rosette or basal leaves. These are some pictures of prickly lettuce, for example, and it's that second year that they're pushing out their flower stalks and producing seeds. So you have a little bit of a longer treatment period here. This is kind of a funny weed for me because this one was brought into the diagnostic desk a couple weeks ago, and I didn't recognize it. And it's super duper common. Let me tell you why I didn't recognize it. And of course, I recognize it now. Is because I always manage it in the year 1 stage. I know what it looks like. I know it's prickly lettuce. I know it's a weed. I get rid of it. It was brought to me in the diagnostic desk as a year 2 stage. And it threw me off a little bit because actually the leaf changes quite a bit on these and it looks very different than how it looks year 1. So all the diagnostic guides were pointing me back to the leaves and the leaves weren't right, but then the flowers were. And it was because there was that, I was looking at that year 2 specimen. So these can change sometimes in their appearance, depending on where they are in their life stage. But again, we're just trying to avoid letting them go to flower and seed is the most important thing with biennials. Okay, and then perennials. They live 3 years or more. We have a couple different types. One's a simple perennial. This is a plant with a single root system, like a dandelion. We have creeping perennials, which may produce with or without the seeds. And so they have other sort of spreading structures with them. Hoary cress or white top is a good example of this. This is one that I have actually in my yard. I have learned what it looks like in the seedling stage, and I really target it heavily when I see it in the seedling stage, and that has been really effective for me to get on top of this particular weed. But if you let it mature, it can be a really huge nuisance plant for you in the landscape. So some of the structures might be things like rhizomes, underground stems, or stolons, which are above ground stems. And so just realizing that with the perennials, you have both the above ground and below ground spreading structures potentially that you have to be concerned about and that you want to plan for how you're going to take care of those. Okay, so some pro tips for managing perennial weeds. Learn to recognize these if you can. It takes some time, but learn to recognize them at the seedling stage. They are like very vulnerable as new plants. So if you can take care of them then, that's going to be really helpful for you. Avoid flower and seed formation, even if it means knocking them back for a year. So as a perennial, you know that they may be returning the next year, but if you don't have time to get to them or you don't have the capacity to get to them, at least knocking them back so they're not flowering and seeding is going to help somewhat. Anticipate a robust underground structure, tap roots, rhizomes. Of course, we know some of our bulbous weeds, Star of Bethlehem, grape hyacinth, some of those. And again, some of these have physiological adaptations like brittleness adaptations that help to preserve them. So be aware of those. Use appropriate tools. We have a hori knife here that is a great tool for getting nice and deep down into the soil to bring up those underground parts, expose more of them, which is going to be more effective for you from a weed management perspective. Excluding sun and water, thick mulch layer, drip irrigation, introducing competition for resources. And if you're going to be applying herbicide treatments, in particular for perennial weeds, usually fall application is recommended. Perennials are bringing a lot of resources into their underground growing parts in the fall time. So it's a great time to target them to get as much of that chemical as possible in those underground structures. Always remember to read and follow the label. But I think that Candace is going to get into a little bit more with chemical control and talk to you about some weed identification resources and technology.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie. So you're probably picking up on the fact that the type of weed you're working with has an impact on how you're going to manage it. So the internet is a wealth of knowledge and resources. You can search by images on Google. There's some great apps out there that help with plant ID. And then USU Extension has an awesome field guide. That's this one here. It's a free downloadable. We'll send a link out to everybody in a follow-up email, so don't stress about trying to find it or keep an eye on the chat box. I would recommend using multiple resources and then referring back to the field guide just to be sure. And then you can always reach out to the extension office that's closest to you. We are really lucky as a state to have a county extension office in almost every county across the state. So just a little bit more on chemical control and a few practical examples before we wrap up and get to your questions. Reminder, you're welcome to ask questions at any point. Please use that Q&A feature. It just helps us keep track of everything. So whenever you're applying something to the landscape, it's so important to read the label. Some herbicides have temperature restrictions, meaning you shouldn't apply the product when the temperatures are over a set point. You'll want to pay attention to what you need to wear when you're applying the product. If you're working with a concentrated product that you need to mix with water, you'll want to thoroughly review the mixing instructions as well as the application rate. And excuse me, and this list goes on. So just read the label, take home point there. So we've mentioned that there are a couple different types of herbicides. As a reminder, the pre-emergent, which is the example on the left, goes on before we see the plant, and then the post-emergent is something that we apply after we see the plant. And like the sunflower that I mentioned earlier, it's not uncommon for plants that you choose for your landscape to be a problem and not want to stay where you put them. Bluebeard or false spirea is a great example of this. I love this shrub, but it does self-seed. It's super easy to pull these seedlings as they pop up, but a pre-emergent would also work well as a preventative. If you're using a granular pre-emergent like the one in this picture, you'll need to water it in. It does come in a pellet form and it needs water to break down and do its thing. And if you read the label, you will definitely know this. And then I mentioned that there are products that have both the pre and the post-emergent mixed together. And this is the type of product that I like to use for the kochia that I mentioned, where I have a problem with that portion of my landscape that runs parallel to the street. So diving just a little bit deeper, there are also non-selective herbicides that will kill everything. And then there are selective herbicides which will target a specific plant. So 2,4-D is a really common example of a selective herbicide that won't kill your grass. So this is one that you could put down on can you could spray on dandelions or bindweed that's growing in your lawn, and and it won't damage the lawn if applied correctly. But this is one of the ones that has a temperature restriction, and it will work really well in the spring and the fall. But if you use it in the heat of the summer, it can turn into a gas and it can move around with the winds and it can kill or damage plants that you aren't intending to harm. We call this herbicide drift. She's seen quite a bit of this in the Salt Lake area this year, and I'd love for her to talk on that briefly.
Yeah, we have. We've been getting a lot of specimens brought in. And I think part of what's going on is actually not just my opinion, it's also Claudia Niswich, who is a plant pathologist up at the Utah Pest team, that Roundup, the formulation has changed. It used to be the active ingredient was glyphosate, and they have replaced that with some other active ingredients. I'm not sure, though, that people realize that glyphosate tend to have a little bit less of a herbicidal drift potential than some of the other broadleaf weed control products that we use in the landscapes. So because that formulation has changed, I think sometimes some folks are still using it. And especially in these higher temperatures with certain active ingredients, we see a lot of herbicidal drift injury. So with products like 2,4-D, we don't recommend putting those down if it's going to be 80, 85 or plus within about 4 to 6 hours of application. And as you can imagine, this time of year, that can be really difficult just about anywhere you are in the state. And so that's something to just be mindful of. And we're seeing all kinds of it this year. I think partly because of that change.
Yeah, that's really good to know. Thank you. And then this third one over here, this is also a selective herbicide, and this one's the opposite of this middle guy. It's only going to target grass. And just for a practical example, this is not my landscape, but I wish it was. Just for a practical example, I've got a spot that's similar to this in my landscape where the landscape plants butt up to the lawn. So in the spring, I'll just spray the border, so this area between the grass and the landscape plants. And I just do it once a season, and I'm good for the whole season. It stops the grass from creeping into my planting beds. You do have to be patient with this product. It's slow. It typically takes a couple of weeks to start working. So there are a lot of options for managing weeds in the landscape. Hopefully, we've given you enough information to help you determine a strategy that's going to work best for you and keep you one step ahead of the problem. This event is being recorded, so if you'd like to refer back to it, we'll share the link with everyone within the next couple of days. Just a reminder, please complete the survey that's going to auto-generate in your browser after this event ends, and use that Q&A box for questions, and we'd love to dive in. Let me stop sharing and see what we've got going.
We have a lot of questions on bindweed. Surprise, surprise. I did put together a couple slides on bindweeds. Let me see if I can get those pulled up. Give me just a second here. And Candace, if there are any, as I'm pulling those up, if there are any that you want to talk about that are in the Q&A, go for it.
Yeah, so we've got a question about pre-emergence. Where can they get it? Does it come in a bottle or a physical barrier? Pre-emergents are readily available anywhere. You can get them at big box stores. You should be able to find them at your local nursery. We showed a few examples in the presentation, but they are really easy to find. You can also get them online. Let's see. All right, bindweed.
Yeah, I've got a couple slides pulled up, or a couple slides I'm pulling up on that. If you want to, if there are any other ones, Candace, you want to hit first. Sorry, I should have had this pre-pulled up, but go ahead and do that, and I'll see if I can get this.
We do have a comment from Steven. He just mentions that he used cardboard under 3 inches from the dump, and then they spray with a pre-post herbicide and hardly get any weeds there. However, they do get spurge, or they're asking how you get rid of spurge in your landscape beds. I'm also having a problem with spurge in my landscape beds as well this year. And fortunately, it's an annual weed, so I've just been pulling to control the seeds, pre-emergent would be a beneficial one for that as well, especially with the rain that we're getting. It could potentially the rain could water the product in for you. So you could skip that step, which would be nice.
Spurge does not have a robust root system associated with it. At least that's been my impression with it, Candace. And so it is really one, if you are coming in with mechanical control, that it's one that you can really do a bit of damage on just because of that. Let me see if I can share this slide that I have pulled up for. Hopefully that shares okay. Can you see that?
It wants to. It says you've started sharing. Oh, there we go. Perfect.
Okay, just took a second there. So, again, bindweed, is that presenter mode or is that full screen?
Not
Sorry.
presenter mode, but
Let me see if I can get it full screen for you. How about that?
There you go. Perfect.
Okay, so bindweed is a creeping perennial. It does have those underground rhizomes. It's also a vining perennial. I think it's a super villain weed, to be honest with you. It's one of those that you just kind of need to, there's not really a silver bullet to take care of bindweed. It is one of those weeds in landscape. It's going to take time, work, and patience. It really is a pretty remarkable plant. The rhizomes can extend quite deep down into the soil. The seeds, you never let this go to seed. The seeds actually can remain viable for 50 plus years. So you really don't want to let it reseed itself. And unfortunately, you don't want to put these plant parts into compost piles and things like that because it takes excessively high. I think it's 160 degrees for something like 12 hours or something along that line to cook field bindweed seeds, which you are never going to be able to accomplish in your backyard compost pile. So this is one that you're throwing away or you're putting into the green waste. And it also can reproduce by both seed and the rhizomes. It takes about an inch of the rhizome to be able to turn into a new plant. This is really a particular concern if you're doing a lot of disturbance or agitation to an area. So tilling and things like that, if you're chopping up a rhizome, you're making it so that you have a lot of new plants that you need to contend with. So it is really tricky. Certainly in a lawn space, having a really dense lawn, doing frequent mowing events to make sure that you're coming in and you're not letting those flowers. This is a picture I took just the other day of actually my son's school. This is just a problem that's going to be an issue for a long time. Bindweed does love water. I showed you the picture of my backyard construction project. It will do just fine under really dry conditions as well. I won't say just fine. It will set it back. But giving it water is really going to make it very, very happy. Unfortunately, it's one of those that's difficult for controlling with competition just because it is it binds. It can move upwards. So that's something that is a little bit trickier with bindweed, but keeping it knocked back is some help to it. And it does really well when it gets neglected as well. So a couple fairly effective control techniques. I'm glad there was the question about the cardboard. There's a lot of controversy right now in terms of use of cardboard for weed control. Just the main reason why is because oftentimes cardboard is not just paper, it's treated with stuff to help it in transit. So it can add some water repellency and then can produce some forever chemicals that can get into those areas. So depending on what kind of a area you're using the cardboard for, that's something to consider. But I have found that aggressive exclusion techniques with bindweed can be really quite effective. This is a site that we were putting down. It's just a product called Ramboard. If you're doing a remodel of your house, you're trying to protect your floors or something like that. It's basically a cardboard that's in a roll that you can roll out, and making sure that there's just really good overlap between these sheets, and then putting down some thick mulch on top of it. This can be a technique that can really exclude sun from bindweed that's trying to grow. It looks amazing when you kind of pull up these materials. Sometimes you'll see all of this growth. It looks like almost like bean sprouts, just handfuls of growth that the bindweed's trying to push up just to find that sun. But really aggressive exclusion techniques like this sometimes can be pretty effective against it. We have a great fact sheet, and I had some questions in particular on lawn, and I really recommend this fact sheet for a lot of those questions. Weed control options for residential lawns in Utah. Just put that in USU or lawn weed control options lawn USU. You'll find this pull up. This is in particular what was written about bindweed. What I like about this fact sheet is it will talk about different types of herbicide formulations, and then it will give specific recommendations and timings based on specific weeds. So this is what was said on bindweed: mowed at the correct height, maintain lawn vigor, spray with 3-way or 4-way herbicide containing quinclorac in early fall. Using a pre-emergent control product in early spring to prevent or suppress weed seed germination. Repeated applications of pre and post-emergent herbicides over a number of years required. So it's really a nice fact sheet that you can go to when you have particular weed pressures or problems, that you can look at what's recommended active ingredient-wise, timing-wise, formulation-wise for control of those particular weeds. So I think that's it for me right now, Candace.
Awesome. That was great, Katie. So here's a question related to kochia. We've got someone that wants to convert part of their lawn to clover, but they've had a lot of kochia that's worked their way into the lawn. What tips or tricks would you have for that?
Is that a question for me?
Yeah, go for it.
In particular, well, I think you had some stuff put up on kochia. What do you find to be the most effective against long-term kochia control, Candace?
Well, I mean, it is an annual. So I mean, just controlling the seed bank is ideal, but if you have a situation like I do where they're coming down your street, you don't have a whole lot of control. So I guess for this setting, if you're taking out the lawn and replacing it, I would just spend a lot of time controlling the kochia as well as any weeds in the landscape before you plant the seed. And it wouldn't be a bad idea just to get rid of everything and then water it for a couple weeks and see what sprouts before you plant your clover seed. If you go back on our YouTube channel, I think it was possibly April or May, one of our presentations was about like removing lawn and starting your project off right. And there was a good chunk of that presentation that focused on managing weeds in the landscape.
Yeah, and I would also add too that you have a height difference kind of advantage with that, where with the kochia really becoming a long-term problem for you, it needs to be able to gain that height to mature into a plant, to produce that mature seed. So when you're trying to grow something that is much more of kind of a ground cover type of a plant, just being very vigilant, make sure that you are not allowing that kochia to grow to the point where it can produce those mature seeds, and you're going to see it really easily, I guess is what I'm going to say. So some diligent maintenance of that area, I think you're going to probably be able to gain the upper hand. I don't know how long kochia seeds are viable. That might be something to look for, but some of these weed seeds, puncture vine, for example, puncture vine weed seeds, I said the bindweed was viable for like 60 plus years. Puncture vine, you're looking at more like 4 years viability on them. So that sometimes can, if you look that up, can give you an idea of how many growing seasons you're looking at aggressive control before you're able to, expect to see kind of a diminishment in terms of those plants popping up for you.
Awesome. How would you tackle Bermuda grass?
Bermuda grass growing in grass or Bermuda grass growing into flower beds?
Well, for this setting, it's taking over the lawn.
Yeah.
But they are planning to participate, or they are participating in the landscape incentive program. So the benefit here is that they have the opportunity to kill off everything.
Yeah. So it's really difficult to control perennial grasses growing in perennial grasses. If we have an annual grass like crabgrass, we can use something like a pre-emergence because it does have to come back year after year. And so it has to reseed itself for that long-term growth. But a perennial grass, especially a creeping perennial grass, is going to be very difficult. So I don't know that I have, just kind of diligently trying to keep on it to if you can spot treat and then try to come back in and reseed or resod to get those areas seeded in terms of a grass situation. But if you are converting over to a flower bed, Candace talked about some of those products that do target monocots and not dicots. And so a grass is a monocot. So you can target grass plants trying to creep into broadleaf flower beds, for example. And then some of the other techniques that we talked about as well, mulching and some of those types of things just to, and just routine maintenance as well. Candace, I don't know if you have anything else that you would suggest with that.
No, I think you nailed it. I'm just curious, how would that over the top spray, I'd need to read the label, but how effective would it be on Bermuda grass? Like if you did have it in your planting bed?
Yeah, I suspect that it probably would do a pretty decent job.
I'm curious.
Yeah. I don't have a lot of Bermuda grass pressure, to be honest with you. It's not one of those that we see. I see it every once in a while, but we don't see a ton of it. Maybe some of my Southern Utah folks might want to chime in, and I suspect that you probably see it a little bit more often than we do. But um, and then any herbicide on the label it's going to give a list of what it's effective against, and so you just want to check that label. And if Bermuda grass is on that label, then chances are that's probably going to be something that's going to work pretty well for you.
Awesome. Speaking of the label, we do have a few questions coming in about how long herbicides last if stored in the garage.
Mm.
And that information should also be on the label. I have noticed I do have better longevity if I can keep it like closer to the house where
Mhm.
it's not going to freeze thaw versus like out in a garden shed or towards the garage door side of my garage.
Yeah, I
Um,
don't have anything else to add to that. I think that's you hit the nail on the head.
cool. How about, do you have any experience with foxtails?
Foxtails for me are something that kind of in the same kind of realm where, again, I guess it kind of depends on where they're growing, but they have a very fragile root system, and that they're very easy to pull to mechanically remove that way. And then because they do push out their seed head on that long stalk, if it's like in a turf area or that sort of a thing, then it's easy enough to kind of mow off those seed heads before those seeds mature. If I'm remembering correctly, I think foxtail is an annual. I might want to double check myself on that, but that would be my suggestion. What about you, Candace? Do you have anything?
That honestly, I don't have a lot of experience with that. I'd have to do some digging. Um, one tip if you are doing Google searches, I like to throw in like foxtail weed and then I'll type in USU extension, and it's just a real fast way to get me to extension resources on anything, like even if it's like gardening related or insect related. Um, it's a good little tip. Let's talk about spurge. We've got a few questions coming in. It's about spurge. How effective do you think, uh, like the pre-emergents that are marketed for preventing crabgrass, how effective do you think those would be on preventing spurge?
I'm gonna let you tackle spurge, Candace, because I know this is one that you see a lot.
Yeah, and I haven't used it. This is a year for spurge. I haven't seen much of it before this year. And it's got to just be timing of the rain. Um, but I haven't used any chemical. It's fairly easy. Like Katie mentioned, it's got a shallow root system, so I'll just pull it. I do have a few spots where it really starts to spread, and I just wasn't on top of it right away, and those are a little harder. I did spray just some vinegar on them just to see what would happen, and it was effective, but I felt like it just kind of pushed it to produce seeds faster. So I don't know that that's something I'll try again, but it was a fun little experiment. So I've just been pulling them, but I do have a few spots where I'm considering using an herbicide, and I haven't dug in to what the best solution would be there.
Spurge for me too is one of those indicator plants that there's bare soil. It really kind of takes over in places, and so again, this is where I kind of talked about earlier that I have a tendency to overthink things, but it's going to come back year after year after year if you have areas with bare soils, especially people that are complaining about really heavy weed pressure in lawn areas. As can you introduce more competition to that space? Why is that particular weed taking over in that area? See a lot of spurge like along sidewalks and some of those areas. I know it's really difficult sometimes to maintain dense stands in those areas, but it might even be like how you're coming along and you're maintaining that edge. Are you using an edger and are you scalping your grass as you're moving along that edge? And is that producing those bare areas where things like spurge are coming in and taking over? Or can you go in and can you do a reseeding event? I talked to a lot of clients in Salt Lake, and I'll keep this brief, but I asked them, I said, when's the last time you renovated your lawn? And they look at me like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, when's the last time you reseeded your lawn space? Oh, no, I've always lived in I moved into my house back in 1960 and I've never really done anything that way. Well, it may be time to think about that. There's a lot of really new technology, improved technology, and turf grass cultivar breeding. It might be just a good idea to think about doing a reseeding event, not necessarily even killing out your existing lawn, but just trying to fill in some of those bare spots so you can generate new grass and dense stands. It's going to introduce that competition for you. That's going to make it so that the spurge seed may be there. It just doesn't have the right conditions to be able to germinate.
That's awesome. Katie, thank you for your time. This was a fabulous presentation. We are just a couple of minutes after 1, so we're going to cut it off here. But if you have questions that we didn't quite get to, feel free to pass them along, and we'd love to shoot some resources your way. Katie, enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see everyone next month.
Bye, thank you.